Hi, everyone, and welcome to Karma Insights. Karma Insights is our podcast here at Karma Advisory. Our intention here is to provide grounded insights from the field on helping folks get work done in digital and business transformations. So today I am here with Rafi Khan, one of our senior consultants here at Karma Advisory, and we're going to be talking about a, a recent digital transformation project that we're working on. And basically, this is a large public sector agency that has a significant transportation operation that it has to handle. And they have a lot of different components to it, whether it's managing vehicles, rosters, a lot of vendors, and they have to manage, who are the folks that can ride the buses. And then you can imagine all the other aspects of this, of accidents and incidents, service requests, and all of that is a part of this picture. And, we have been helping with, gathering requirements and trying to help design out what the future state looks like. And, we wanted to focus this conversation on a lot of this idea of, you're in this situation where there's a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different systems, a lot of unsaid and said processes. Sometimes the policies are very well known, sometimes they are not known at all. And there are a bunch of rules and regulations as well. And there is a strategic vision that makes a lot of logical sense, but it's also hard to help everyone see the path towards that vision. And in that context, you have to design a future system, gather requirements, make sure everyone's on the same page and feeling good about, where things are going in terms of creating a future state system, right? And I would also suggest that there are a lot of other complexities here of project management. Folks want to make this hybrid agile, but they want to know from the start how things are going to work in the end, things like this. And, all of these are a part of the picture. And not to mention that the one area that we are, and this is more, that is being worked on is one of many other areas that is being worked on at the same time. So everything is a little bit of an ongoing and changing roadmap that requires everyone to be a bit nimble. So, with that, I think that, Rafi, why don't we jump in here, and if if you were to say and look back and say, like, very objectively, what are the complicating factors that you would say that, everyone who's listening can really latch on to and understand and say, yes, those are the objective, complicating factors that they might experience too in trying to solve a problem, right? And when I say solve a problem, I'm saying, figure out the requirements or the solution for a future state system. What are some of those that come to your mind?
Well, I would say principally it would be how your approach is going to be with managing stakeholders and a lot of their expectations and goals that they have for the project as well. You would also want to get a better understanding or perspective on what their impressions or perspective is of some of the key issues and challenges that they have. More often than not, when dealing with many different stakeholders, it's critical to ensure that everyone's understanding of the challenges that they face with the project may vary a little bit. So just getting that perspective, I found, is paramount when it involves business requirements gathering.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you there. I mean, it's interesting. It's like, there's the reality of how some of this is done. And the thing that I always have to appreciate in any of these projects is that it's like we come in and we're trying to help design this future state system. And I can never, ever forget that our clients they are still running the day-to-day operations. They are putting out fires every day, right? And so sometimes there is a SME, a subject matter expert that's helping, share how things work on the ground. And then there are lots of other folks that have different points of view on things and a lot of other downstream and upstream stakeholders. For example, the contracts team or the legal team or the finance team and how they need the data. And everyone has a different perspective. And then the challenge I think we often see is that not only do they have a different perspective, but they have a different set of goals and challenges that they're fundamentally facing in the sense of they might be in the middle of transforming how they manage contracts or their finance systems. And so they don't actually know how things are going to work. And then the other reality that I often think about is that it's not as if the current state process is by any shape or form the ideal process, right? Right. And they might not even have a defined process. And so we're trying to bring that up to the forefront as well. And I think that's a big part of this, of like the complicating factor. It's actually just trying to understand that current state environment, because it's usually not documented. And I don't think that's like some kind of ding or something like that. It's like, well, you're a giant organization and things are constantly in flux. Yeah, some processes won't be documented. There won't be a pretty traceable process flow that says, here is the high level, and then here are all the detailed flows. And so that's usually not there. And then the policies or procedures, some of them are written down, but is it written down in some traceable way that everyone can easily understand how it relates to the process? Definitely, usually not the case, right? And then, especially as we see it in a lot of the digital transformation work we work on, a lot of the systems that were created that are being used in the current state are fairly rudimentary. They don't have data validation, they don't have workflows. They're more focused on data entry, and that presents its own set of challenges because it those types of systems give complete flexibility for every use case and every exception scenario because there is nothing to stop the user from doing anything. And, that is also a big just it is just there as a challenge, right? Any other thoughts there, Rafi, that you want to share?
Yeah, I think those are all very legitimate points, especially when it comes to regulatory constraints. That's something that sometimes gets overlooked, or it's very easy to overlook something like that. But when you are involved in a digital modernization effort, especially within a large public sector, there is going to be variability on some of these regulatory or imminent regulatory constraints that need to be taken into consideration. And also, one other thing I would also add, specifically for this effort, would be understanding of evolving technologies. As you mentioned, there is an integration of some of these old and new systems, and having a firm understanding of these evolving technologies from its current state into its future state is also going to aid in a lot of the business requirement gathering steps.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, the final thing that's coming up in my mind of the complicating factor is the actual on the ground work of it, right? I think that oftentimes, every time you look at any organization, they have a different way that they do things, right? And as a firm coming in to support, they might have a tech team, they might have business analysts, they might have project managers, but trying to integrate into the way that they've traditionally done things, I think, is a really important aspect of this. And some of those processes may or may not be defined. Some of those templates may or may not be defined. And trying to find a way that can meet how folks might have passed while trying to iterate and create a cleaner path forward for some of that, while acknowledging that and I always think about this that our time is temporary there, right? And how do we leave our clients with resources and deliverables that can continue living on after we're not there? And I think that that's where I've thought a lot about that. It's like the last thing any of us wants is to create something that can't be used in the future, right? And I think thinking in the very, very long term, is a really big part of that, at least with some of the on the ground deliverables and getting it out the door and how to make sure that they can be used in the long run. So let's do this. Why don't we, the thing that I wanted to, that I was thinking we can focus a little bit on is, you know, the framework that we tend to use a lot, in these environments is looking at the things from this perspective of SEQA as a foundational strategy for solving problems and requirement gathering. And so why don't we chat a little bit about that, Rafi? Because I think that's kind of like the big takeaway that we want folks to take away from this call is that there's, for those of you who don't know, there's this wonderful book called Barbara Minto's The Minto Principle, worth reading. It's required here for everyone here at Karma Advisory. And, one of the most foundational frameworks that is in that book is this idea of SCQA. What is the objective situation, right? What are the objective complicating factors? And when you think of situation and complication, you want them to be so objective that it doesn't matter which stakeholder is reading it, it is objective and everyone would agree with it, right? And that's really important because you need to bring everyone to understand the foundational problem, right? So that's S, and then that's C, and then question. That is, what is the fundamental question you're trying to answer? And I think that that's a really important aspect of this too, because what we tend to see is that you'll think that the question is X, but it's actually Y. And not that, the first question isn't the important one, but it might be a more detailed question, that does need to be answered, but is not the fundamental question, right? And then we have our answer, so to speak, right? And that's like the solution for X. And I think that what Rafi and I think, what we're seeing is that using this framework for all the different aspects of requirements creation is is just foundational. It makes things easier. It makes our ability to work on problems as a team with between us and the rest of our team far more easier, and it even makes it easier to communicate with other stakeholders because they frankly know what they're going to get. They're going to understand the background context, they're going to understand the complicating factors. Then we're going to say, let's agree on the question, and then let's talk about the high level solution that we're thinking about and get agreement on the components there. So why don't we talk about this a little bit from the different aspects, Rafi? I think that, from current state analysis to future state requirements and wireframes, maybe there's an example that's coming up for you or, whatever you'd like to share around this, Rafi. I'm open, but, around SCQA and how it has supported in the requirements gathering process from your perspective.
Yes, absolutely. I think starting from a base ground level, as you mentioned, some of the challenges that we generally face, especially when it involves understanding current state processes and how critical that would be to gathering business requirements, is usually there will be no documentation or anything archival that you can leverage for resources to have a better understanding of what some of these current state processes are, and that leaves the onus to you as the individual to be resourceful. And one of the resources that I've found to be most beneficial is obviously going to be the human capital that you already have that's expended to you. And what that means is conducting interviews with several different stakeholders and having their perspective on what the current state process is, and establishing a firm understanding of that current state process is going to enable you to also then identify some of these complicating factors that are occurring within this current state process and how you want to mitigate some of these things. And that would be a nice way to begin the business requirements gathering process.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there, Rafi, and I think that that's like kind of the key here. It's like, when you're doing these interviews to understand the current state, and, mind you that like there is like looking at all the documentation to understand whatever there is in the current state, then doing some of these interviews to say, okay, let's make sure we understand it overall. We're starting to pick up on the situation, the overall background of what needs to get done, right? Then we understand some of the complicating factors. That's another way of saying what are the needs and the pain points, right?
Hmm.
And then, fundamentally we can say what is the question we're trying to resolve, right?
Hmm.
And I think that when we look at that from an application perspective, like the foundational question, like let's say we need to maintain a roster, like the foundational question might be, how do we maintain, like, or do we understand how this organization can maintain a roster that has data integrity, that is like they have an honest telling of what the roster is for their organization. And I think that, if you can understand that that's your fundamental question that you're trying to go towards in your future state, that can help guide all of the future state thinking. And then the complicating factors can really give you all the needs and the pain points. And then that can help to drive like, all right, we can start to figure out like a conceptual future state document or something, to say like, here's our conceptual future state wireframe, right? Here are the different components that we think can address those kinds of components. And the thing that I think is really interesting about this, Rafi, is that like, it sometimes what I like to do is put all of this in a document with lots of, honestly, like numbered and lettered bullets, right? So that way I can understand all of the components of the complicating factors, right? Like, where you could have a bunch of details and you could say, all right, the first complicating factor is there is a lot of,
We
we
don't
don't
know
know who all the employees
are,
are,
right?
right?
And
And
so
so that becomes a significant problem there. And then we don't know, and then there's a bunch of problems there. And then we don't have an accurate understanding of, baseline employee data and attributes and stuff. And, you can start to break up all of the different components in the complicating factors. And then by the very nature of that, what are the different components in the future state. And then that helps to sketch out the future state vision of what needs to be created.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Another perspective that I would introduce here is obviously that we're looking at the future state here, but maybe the current state experience is also something that needs to be understood and documented as well. A good way that I found to help have a clearer picture of that is creating something called a current state experience lifecycle, and that would involve reviewing any sort of existing policies and procedural documentation. What The purpose for that would be for us to try to create an overall flow diagram to understand specific decision trees and have that documented, and how there's maybe different stakeholders that are involved with specific decisions, whether there's certain approval processes that must be taken into consideration, maybe also reviewing any sort of existing flows, so we can have a very comprehensive view on what some of these user and or system flows can be. And I think what the ultimate product of that is going to lead up to is identifying a lot of these pain points and inefficiencies that is currently existing within this particular system, and having a clear cut identification of some of these pain points is what's going to enable you to provide the most effective solutions for our clients.
Yeah, I think, to just kind of put a fine point on what you're saying there, we have this idea of, okay, let's leverage a framework of situation, complication, question, and answer for a lot of this. And then I think that sometimes what we find is creating a current state experience lifecycle can be a really good way of codifying aspects of the complicating factors, and all of that information you're gathering. And then it can help tie in all the existing flows and all of that. And it's just a phenomenally powerful way to do it. I think we're going to probably have to set up another episode to talk about a customer experience lifecycle and how to create that for sure. But, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen and looking forward to sharing with everyone a little bit more. I think we're going to get into customer experience lifecycle next and probably future state development as well. So looking forward to sharing that with everyone in an upcoming episode.
Thank you, everyone.